My name is James Parker, and this is the story of the fishing trip that forever changed my life. It was the summer of 2018, July 14th to be exact, when my family and I decided to take a weekend getaway to a secluded lake deep in the forests of Maine. My wife Claire, our two children Jessica and Lucas, and our loyal dog Max were all looking forward to a relaxing retreat from the hustle and bustle of city life. We set out early that Saturday morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon. The drive to the lake was peaceful, filled with laughter and excited chatter about the fish we hoped to catch. We arrived at the cabin we had rented by 9 a.m., its rustic charm and serene surroundings promising the perfect escape. Little did we know it would soon become the backdrop for a nightmare we could never have imagined. The cabin was quaint, with a small dock that extended out onto the lake. After unpacking, we quickly settled into our temporary home. By noon, we were all down by the dock, fishing poles in hand, and ready to start our adventure. The lake was calm, the water glistening under the midday sun. Jessica and Lucas were especially excited, casting their lines with eager anticipation. Claire and I watched them with smiles, enjoying the rare opportunity to disconnect from our busy lives. Max ran around the dock, barking at the occasional bird that flew by. It was the perfect family moment. But as the day wore on, an unsettling feeling began to creep over me. Around 3 p.m., as we were getting ready to pack up for lunch, I noticed a figure emerging from the woods. A man, probably in his late 40s, with unkempt hair and a scruffy beard. He wore a worn-out flannel shirt and faded jeans, carrying a large backpack. At first, I thought he might be another vacationer, but as he got closer, something about him seemed off. "Hello there." He greeted us with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mind if I join you for a bit? Name's Paul." There was something unsettling about Paul, but not wanting to be rude, I nodded. "Sure, we're just about to head in for lunch. You're welcome to join us." Paul declined, saying he preferred to stay by the lake. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this man than met the eye, but I pushed the thought aside, focusing on my family. After lunch, we returned to the dock to find Paul still there, casting his line into the water. He hadn't caught anything, and his demeanor had grown more agitated. Jessica and Lucas seemed oblivious to the tension, their excitement for fishing overriding any sense of unease. As the afternoon wore on, Paul's behavior became increasingly erratic. He muttered to himself, occasionally casting furtive glances our way. By 5 p.m., the sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the lake. Claire suggested we head back to the cabin for dinner, and I agreed, eager to put some distance between us and the strange man. After a hearty dinner, we decided to make the most of the remaining daylight by taking a stroll around the lake. Paul was nowhere to be seen, and I hoped he had moved on. The walk was peaceful, the cool evening air a welcome relief from the day's heat. As night fell, we settled in around a small fire pit outside the cabin. The kids roasted marshmallows, while Claire and I enjoyed a glass of wine. Max lay contentedly at our feet, the crackling fire casting flickering shadows around us. It was then that we heard the sound of faint rustling in the bushes behind us. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. To our relief, it was just a deer, its eyes glowing in the firelight before it darted back into the woods. We laughed off the scare, but the sense of unease lingered. The next morning, we decided to take the boat out on the lake. The water was still and calm, the perfect conditions for fishing. As we rowed out to the middle of the lake, the kids chattered excitedly about the fish they hoped to catch. It was around 10 a.m. when we saw him again. Paul was standing on the shore, watching us with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. "Let's move a bit further out," I suggested, trying to keep my voice light. Claire gave me a questioning look, but nodded. We spent the next few hours fishing, the tension slowly easing as we enjoyed our time together. By 2 p.m. we had a decent catch and decided to head back to the cabin for lunch. As we approached the dock, I noticed something odd. Paul was gone, but his backpack was still there, lying abandoned on the shore. A sense of foreboding settled over me, but I didn't want to alarm the kids. That evening, as the sun set, casting an eerie orange glow over the lake, we decided to have one last fishing session before packing up the next day. The kids were tired from the day's activities, so it was just Claire and me by the dock. As we cast our lines into the water, the silence was broken by a sudden scream. We turned to see Lucas running towards us, his face pale with fear. "Paul came into the cabin," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "He scared us." My heart stopped. "Where's Jessica?" I asked, grabbing his shoulders. "She's inside, hiding," he sobbed. Claire and I ran back to the cabin, finding Jessica curled up in a corner, terrified but unharmed. Max was barking furiously, his eyes fixed on the spot where Paul had been standing. As I tried to calm Jessica down, I noticed something odd about Paul's abandoned backpack. I opened it, and what I found inside made my blood run cold. It was filled with children's toys, clothing, and a notebook filled with disturbing sketches and notes. One page in particular caught my eye. It was a detailed drawing of our cabin with notes about our activities and routines. My hands shook as I read the words scrawled at the bottom of the page, "Wait until they leave the kids alone." The authorities conducted a thorough investigation, but there was no trace of Paul. The lake, once a place of peace and relaxation, had become a site of unimaginable horror. Our family returned home deeply shaken by the experience. Jessica and Lucas were safe, but the memory of that fishing trip still haunts us. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that Paul is still out there watching and waiting. The memory of that fishing trip haunts me, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the most unexpected places. So if you ever find yourself by a secluded lake, be wary of strangers. You never know what their true intentions might be. It was the summer of 2018, June 15th to be exact. My friends and I had planned a camping trip to Pine Ridge Campground, a secluded spot about 50 miles away from our hometown. We were a group of 5, me, my best friend Sarah, her boyfriend Mike, my cousin Jenny, and our friend Tom. We were all in our mid-20s looking forward to a weekend away from our mundane routines. We arrived at the campground around 3 p.m. The place was serene, surrounded by thick woods and a beautiful lake. We set up our tents, gathered firewood, and prepared for what we thought would be a fun-filled weekend. Little did we know our peaceful retreat was about to turn into a nightmare. As the sun set, we lit a campfire and sat around it, sharing stories and laughter. It was around 10 p.m. when we heard the first strange noise. It was a rustling sound coming from the woods behind us. We brushed it off as a deer or some other animal and continued our conversation. About an hour later, Tom decided to take a walk to the lake. He said he needed some fresh air. We didn't think much of it and let him go. But then, 10 minutes later, we heard a blood-curdling scream. It was Tom. We all jumped up and ran towards the sound, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. We found Tom near the lake, trembling and pale. He said he saw a man watching him from the woods, a man with a sinister smile. We scanned the area with our flashlights but found no one. We decided it was best to stick together and return to our campsite. We tried to shake off the encounter, but the atmosphere had changed. There was an unsettling tension in the air. Around midnight, we decided to call it a night. We retreated to our tents, but sleep didn't come easy. Every sound seemed amplified. Every shadow seemed ominous. At 2 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my tent. I held my breath, straining to hear. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, circling our campsite. I wanted to call out, but fear paralyzed me. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded away. I didn't sleep a wink for the rest of the night. The next morning, we all gathered around the fire, discussing the events of the night. Tom looked particularly shaken, but he brushed it off, saying he was fine. We decided to go fishing at the lake to clear our heads. Pine Ridge had some great fishing spots, and we hoped the activity would help us relax. We grabbed our fishing gear and headed to the lake. The sun was shining and the water was calm. It seemed like a perfect day for fishing. We cast our lines and waited. The tranquility of the moment started to ease our nerves. We even managed to catch a few fish, and for a brief period, it felt like a normal camping trip. But then, as we were reeling in our lines, Tom pointed out something strange. Across the lake, partially hidden in the trees, was a figure. It was the same man he had seen the night before, watching us intently. The sinister smile was gone, replaced by a cold, emotionless stare. We quickly packed up our gear and returned to our campsite, the eerie encounter shattering our brief moment of peace. The unsettling feeling lingered as the day wore on. We decided to go for a hike to clear our heads further. Pine Ridge had some beautiful trails, and we hoped the hike would lift our spirits. Around noon, we reached a clearing with a breathtaking view of the lake. We took a break, snapping photos and enjoying the scenery. That's when Jenny decided to wander off to get some pictures of wildflowers. She promised to stay within sight, but minutes passed, and she didn't return. We called out for her, but there was no response. Panic set in as we spread out to search for her. It was like she vanished into thin air. We combed the area for hours, calling her name, but there was no sign of Jenny. As the sun began to set, we realized we needed help. We rushed back to our campsite and called 911. A search party arrived within an hour, and the woods were soon swarming with police and volunteers. They searched through the night and into the next day, but Jenny was nowhere to be found. The police questioned us extensively. They seemed particularly interested in Tom's encounter the previous night. He described the man he saw again, but it didn't provide any leads. We were all suspects, but there was no evidence to point to any of us. Days turned into weeks and Jenny remained missing. The media got wind of the story, and Pine Ridge became the center of a media frenzy. The public speculated wildly. Some thought it was a bear attack. Others whispered about serial killers. None of the theories brought us any closer to finding Jenny. Mike, usually the rock of our group, started to unravel. He blamed himself for not keeping a closer eye on Jenny. Sarah tried to console him, but she was struggling with her own guilt. Tom became increasingly paranoid, convinced the man he saw was stalking him. I tried to keep everyone together, but the strain was too much. 3 months after Jenny's disappearance, a breakthrough came. A hiker found a piece of Jenny's camera in the woods, miles away from where she vanished. The police organized another search, and this time, they found more of her belongings scattered along a trail leading deeper into the forest. Following the trail, they discovered an old abandoned cabin. Inside, they found disturbing evidence: Jenny's clothes, her camera, and photos of her taken while she was unconscious. The man from the lake was in the photos, his face twisted into that same sinister smile. It was clear that Jenny had been held there, but there was no sign of her. As the investigation continued, the police uncovered something even more disturbing. Eric, the seemingly friendly campground manager, had a dark past. He had been fired from his previous job for inappropriate behavior and had a history of mental illness. Worse, there were rumors that he was involved in black magic and occult practices. Eric had always seemed a bit off, but we had no idea just how dangerous he was. The police searched his cabin and found a hidden room filled with strange symbols, candles, and jars of animal remains. It was clear that Eric had been performing rituals, but their purpose was unclear. Determined to find Jenny, we decided to confront Eric ourselves. We couldn't just sit back and wait for the police to act. Armed with flashlights and a sense of desperation, we went to Eric's cabin in the dead of night. The air was thick with tension as we approached. The cabin was dark, but we could see the flicker of candlelight through the windows. We burst in, ready to face whatever horrors lay inside. Eric was there, in the hidden room, chanting in a language none of us understood. The room was filled with the stench of decay, and the walls were covered in strange symbols. Eric turned to us, his eyes wild and crazed. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. We demanded to know where Jenny was, but Eric just laughed. "She's part of the ritual now. You'll never find her." A struggle ensued. Eric was surprisingly strong for his age, and his madness gave him a terrifying edge. We fought him off, managing to overpower him just long enough to escape the cabin. As we ran through the woods, we heard Eric's voice behind us chanting and laughing. The trees seemed to close in around us, and every shadow seemed to hide some unseen horror. We made it back to the campsite and called the police, but by the time they arrived, Eric had vanished. The police searched the woods and the cabin thoroughly but found no trace of Eric or Jenny. It was as if they had both disappeared into thin air. The media dubbed it the Pine Ridge Mystery, and theories about what happened to Jenny and Eric ran wild. The campground was shut down and we all tried to move on with our lives, but the events of that summer haunted us. We kept in touch, supporting each other as best we could. Tom moved away, unable to bear the memories of what happened. Mike and Sarah broke up, the strain of the ordeal too much for their relationship. To this day, Jenny has never been found. Eric remains at large, a dark shadow hanging over our memories. We still don't know what he was trying to achieve with his rituals or why he targeted us. The unanswered questions linger, a constant reminder of that terrifying summer. As for me, I still go camping, but I'm always looking over my shoulder, always listening for the sound of footsteps in the night. The Pine Ridge Mystery changed us all, and will never be the same. If you ever find yourself at a secluded campground, be careful. You never know who or what might be watching you. My name is Linda, and I'm here to share a story that has haunted me for years. It's a story of a fishing trip that was supposed to be a peaceful retreat, but turned into a nightmare that still sends shivers down my spine. This is not a tale of supernatural beings or ghosts, but of a real terrifying encounter with a person who left an indelible mark on my life. It was a sunny Saturday morning on August 14th, 2019. The time was exactly 8:30 a.m. when I decided to escape the hustle and bustle of city life for a weekend fishing trip. I had just turned 40 and felt like I needed some time to reflect and rejuvenate. Fishing had always been a calming activity for me, a way to connect with nature and clear my mind. I packed my gear, a couple of sandwiches and a thermos of coffee, and set off for Lake Whispering Pines. It was a serene, secluded spot about a 2-hour drive from my home in Columbus, Ohio. I arrived at the lake around 10:30 a.m., the sun high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the shimmering water. The place was as beautiful as I remembered, with tall pines surrounding the lake and a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. By 11 a.m., I had set up my fishing rod and settled into my favorite spot near a large, overhanging willow tree. The lake was unusually quiet, with only the sound of birds chirping and the occasional splash of fish breaking the surface. I took a deep breath, feeling the stress of daily life begin to melt away. As the hours passed, I lost track of time, completely absorbed in the rhythmic motion of casting and reeling. It was around 2 p.m. when I noticed another person arriving at the lake. He was a man, probably in his mid-50s, with a weathered face and a sinister air about him. He wore a tattered brown jacket and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. I tried not to pay him much attention, focusing on my fishing, but something about him made me uneasy. He set up his gear a little too close for comfort, considering the vast expanse of the lake. It was now around 3 p.m., and the sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the water. "Nice day for fishing, huh?" he said, breaking the silence. I forced a smile and nodded. "Yeah, it's perfect." There was something off about his demeanor, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. He kept glancing at me from the corner of his eye, his expression unreadable. time seemed to slow down as the afternoon wore on. It was now 5 p.m., and I was starting to pack up my things, thinking about heading back to my cabin before it got dark. The man hadn't moved much, just kept fishing and occasionally looking my way. As I stood up to leave, he suddenly appeared next to me, startling me. "Leaving already?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "Yeah, it's getting late. I should head back," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. "Need any help?" he offered, his eyes boring into mine. "No, thank you. I'm fine," I said, my heart beginning to race. I quickly gathered my things and started walking towards my car, parked a short distance away. The man followed me at a distance, and I could feel his eyes on my back. It was now 5:30 p.m., and the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. As I reached my car, I realized with a sinking feeling that the man was still behind me. I fumbled with my keys, trying to unlock the door as quickly as possible. "Are you sure you don't need any help?" he asked again, closer this time. I didn't respond, just managed to get the door open and slipped inside, locking it behind me. I started the engine and drove off, glancing in the rearview mirror. He stood there, watching me, a sinister smile playing on his lips. I arrived at my cabin around 6:30 p.m., feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The cabin was a small, cozy place I'd rented for the weekend, nestled in the woods a few miles from the lake. I locked the door behind me and tried to shake off the feeling of unease. As night fell, the cabin felt more isolated than ever. The only sounds were the occasional hoot of an owl and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I tried to distract myself with a book, but my mind kept wandering back to the man at the lake. Around 9 p.m., I heard a noise outside. My heart skipped a beat as I listened intently. It sounded like footsteps, slowly approaching the cabin. I crept to the window and peered out, my breath catching in my throat. There he was, the man from the lake, standing just outside, looking directly at the cabin. Panic surged through me, and I quickly grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off. I decided to barricade myself in the bedroom, dragging a heavy dresser in front of the door. It was now 9:30 p.m., and the darkness outside seemed to press in on me, suffocating. I could hear him moving around outside, occasionally tapping on the windows, sending shivers down my spine. The minutes felt like hours as I sat there, clutching a kitchen knife for protection. Suddenly, there was a loud bang on the front door, followed by the sound of breaking glass. He was trying to get in. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. What did he want? Why was he doing this? The fear was overwhelming, and I could feel my hands trembling. At around 10 p.m., I heard him enter the cabin. His footsteps were slow and deliberate, echoing through the small space. He was calling out, taunting me. Come out, wherever you are," he sing-songed, his voice sending chills down my spine. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't find me. But the sound of his footsteps grew closer, and I knew he was searching the rooms. It was only a matter of time before he reached the bedroom. When he finally did, he tried the door, but the dresser held firm. He banged on it, trying to force it open. I could hear him cursing under his breath. I knew I couldn't stay there much longer. I had to find a way out. There was a small window in the bedroom, just big enough for me to squeeze through. I quietly opened it and slipped outside, the cool night air hitting my face. It was now 10:30 p.m., and I could hear him still trying to break down the door. I ran towards the woods, not looking back. My heart was pounding, and my legs felt like they were on fire, but I kept going. I reached a neighboring cabin around 11 p.m., where an older couple let me in and called the police. Their warm, inviting home was a stark contrast to the icy fear I had just escaped. The woman, Margaret, held my hand and assured me I was safe, while her husband, Harold, kept a watchful eye on the door. When the police arrived, They searched my cabin and the surrounding area. They found the broken glass and signs of forced entry, but there was no trace of the man, as if he had vanished into thin air. The officers took detailed notes and promised increased patrols, but their assurances did little to calm my nerves. Margaret and Harold insisted I stay with them for the night. Despite their hospitality, sleep was elusive. Every creak and groan of the cabin sent my heart racing. Harold stayed up with me, sitting by the fire with a shotgun across his knees. The next morning, escorted by the police, I returned to my cabin to pack my things. I noticed a small carved figurine on the porch, one that hadn't been there before. It was crudely shaped like a man with dark, hollow eyes. A chill ran down my spine as I realized it was a warning from the stranger. I never went back to Lake Whispering Pines, and I haven't been fishing since. The experience left a scar that time has yet to heal. The police never found the man, and the case remains open. Margaret and Harold kept in touch, their kindness a small comfort. They told me stories of other strange occurrences in the area, making me realize that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are those who walk among us. The memory of that night still haunts me. The sound of footsteps, the man's gravelly voice, the terror of being hunted. These are things I carry with me every day. It's a reminder that sometimes the scariest things aren't ghosts or monsters, but people with dark intentions. Stay safe and always trust your instincts. The world can be a dangerous place, and you never know when you might find yourself face to face with true evil.